It was supposed to be a normal Saturday morning. The sun was out, birds chirping, and I finally had the time to do something that had been on my to-do list for months: cleaning the gutters of my own house. I set up the ladder, put on my gloves, and got to work. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. But of course, it wouldn't stay that way for long, not in a neighborhood like ours. Just as I was halfway through pulling out a soggy clump of leaves, I heard that voice. You know the type. Sharp, loud, and already laced with accusations. It was Karen from across the street. She stormed over, hands on hips, demanding to know what I was doing. I calmly explained I was cleaning my gutters on my own property, minding my own business. But that wasn't enough. She insisted I was tampering with the neighborhood's water drainage and said I looked suspicious. Before I could even respond, she whipped out her phone and called 911 right in front of me. Now, here's where things take a turn she never saw coming. What Karen didn't realize was that my wife works as a 911 dispatcher. And guess who picked up the call? The moment she said my name and address, my wife's eyes widened. From her headset miles away, she stayed calm and professional. But inside, oh, she was fuming and curious. She knew exactly what I was doing and exactly who was making the complaint, and me. I just stood there, watching Karen describe me like I was some criminal breaking into my own home. My wife stayed on the line, listening closely, waiting for the officers to respond. But what happened when the cops finally pulled up? Well, let's just say, Karen didn't expect that. Karen stood there pacing on the sidewalk, still on the phone, giving what sounded like the most dramatic 911 report ever made over gutter cleaning. She kept glancing at me like she expected me to bolt or confess to something, like I had a secret plan involving leaves and downspouts. I kept wiping my hands on my jeans, trying to stay calm, but honestly, it felt surreal. My ladder was still propped up, the tools laid out neatly beside the garage. And here I was being treated like a suspect on my own driveway. Now, let me give you a little context. Karen has lived across the street for about 3 years. She's made complaints before, once about the color of our porch lights, another time about our dog barking during a thunderstorm. But this was a whole new level. The strange thing is, she never complains directly to us. She always escalates it. HOA emails, passive-aggressive notes, and now apparently emergency calls. My wife, Jenna, knew all about Karen. She'd heard plenty of stories from me and had even seen her act out at a neighborhood meeting. So when she answered that 911 call and heard Karen describing a man climbing the side of a house in broad daylight, she didn't have to ask twice who it was. But she stayed professional, asking the standard questions, gathering the info, while silently messaging one of the officers she trusted to handle it with care. Meanwhile, I stayed on the ladder, determined to finish the last stretch of gutter. I could feel Karen watching me like a hawk, muttering into the phone. I even saw her snap a photo, probably thinking she was collecting evidence. And just when I thought things couldn't get weirder, I heard the distant sound of sirens heading down our street. The sirens got louder, and sure enough, 2 patrol cars slowed to a stop in front of my driveway. I climbed down the ladder slowly, trying to keep everything cool. Karen practically sprinted toward them, waving her hands like she'd just caught a criminal. She pointed at me and started unloading her version of the story: how I was acting suspicious, how I didn't properly notify the HOA, and how she felt threatened by my presence near my own gutters. One of the officers, Officer Daniels, stepped out. I immediately recognized him. He and my wife had worked together on a few dispatch calls. And he'd been to our block before for noise complaints and a raccoon in someone's trash. He walked over to me first, calm and collected. "Hey man," he said, "just cleaning up today." I nodded, explained everything: how the gutters had overflowed during last week's rainstorm, how I took the day off to catch up on home maintenance, and how Karen suddenly decided I was a public threat. While Daniel spoke to me, his partner stayed with Karen. She kept glancing over, clearly expecting me to be in handcuffs already. But instead of calming down, she started raising her voice, claiming I was tampering with city property and endangering the community. It was so over the top, even Daniels gave me a side glance, like, is she for real? Inside the house, my wife Jenna was still on the call line, quietly listening to how the officers were handling it. She wanted to stay out of it professionally, but I could tell from the quick text she sent me. Don't say anything, Dom. I'm listening. That? She was keeping a close eye on how this unfolded. Meanwhile, a few neighbors started stepping out, drawn by the noise and flashing lights. I heard whispers, phones recording, and then Karen spotted one of our neighbors waving at me like everything was normal. That seemed to push her over the edge. And that's when she demanded the officers check the legality of my ladder. Officer. Daniels raised an eyebrow at the latter comment, clearly trying not to laugh. He turned toward it, then back at me, almost like he was waiting for an explanation. I shrugged. It's a regular extension ladder from Home Depot, I said, keeping my tone even. Been using it for years. Karen, arms folded tight across her chest, wasn't satisfied. Well, it doesn't have visible safety tags, she snapped. He could fall and sue the neighborhood. This is a liability. The second officer. Reed was now standing next to her, notebook in hand, but you could tell he wasn't writing much. Instead, he was scanning the street, noticing the small crowd gathering. A couple of my neighbors stood with folded arms, quietly watching the scene unfold. One even whispered to the other, "She's at it again." Daniels looked over at me and asked if I had ID on me. I handed it over, still keeping calm, even though my stomach was starting to twist. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but the longer this dragged out, the weirder it felt. Karen was now rattling off complaints, how she'd seen me wandering in and out of the backyard, how I moved the trash bins without permission, and even suggested that I was possibly scoping out houses. Inside the house, Jenna was still on headset, silently following every word. She had access to the live feed now, thanks to the patrol cam. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to intervene if needed, but still holding back. Daniels handed back my ID, but then Karen pointed to my toolbox and loudly said, "He has tools. Shouldn't you check them? What if they're not his?" The officers exchanged a look. Then Reed finally stepped toward my stuff, unzipped the top pouch and just as he did, Karen gasped and took a step back like something dangerous had just been found. The tension in the air snapped tight. Everyone froze. Officer Reed paused, hands still hovering inside the toolbox, clearly caught off guard by Karen's sudden outburst. Everyone's eyes were locked on him, neighbors holding their breath. Karen, practically trembling like she'd just uncovered something criminal. But all he pulled out was a rusted old gutter scoop. Just plastic and grime. He turned it over in his hand, then looked at Karen with a confused expression, like he was trying to figure out if she was serious or just messing with him. Karen's face flushed, but she didn't back down. Instead, she shifted her focus. "Check his phone," she barked. "He's probably recording me without permission." Her voice was sharp now, frantic, almost. I could feel the shift. This wasn't just a complaint anymore. It was personal. And the crowd watching. They started murmuring, some with their phones raised now, catching every second. Reed took a step back and spoke more firmly this time. "Ma'am, unless there's an actual crime or threat, we're not going through anyone's personal property." But that only made Karen more determined. "Well then," she said, pulling out her phone again, "I'll call the HOA president. Myself, he'll back me up. He knows what kind of nonsense goes on over here." That's when it happened. One of the neighbors, Mr. Harris, a quiet retired guy from 2 doors down, walked forward and calmly said, "Actually, the HOA president moved out 2 months ago. We're between board elections." Karen froze, clearly caught off guard. "What? That's not possible." "I just spoke to him," she snapped. Harris shook his head. "Unless you're talking to yourself, I don't think so." At that moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked it quickly. Jenna had sent a one-line message. "She's not in our HOA system." I blinked. Wait, what? That couldn't be right. Karen had claimed she was part of the HOA committee since we moved in, always throwing rules around, like she wrote them. But now, it looked like Karen wasn't even officially listed. And if she wasn't, then who exactly had she been speaking for this whole time? I stared at the message on my phone, reading it twice just to be sure. "She's not in our HOA system." My heart picked up a beat. All this time, Karen had been throwing around fake authority, pretending she was some sort of HOA enforcer, when, in reality, she wasn't even listed as a member. I looked up and locked eyes with Officer Daniels, who'd seen me read the message. I showed him the screen without a word. He gave a low whistle and muttered, "Well, that changes a few things." Daniels stepped forward, calm but firm. "Ma'am," he said, "we're getting word that you're not actually affiliated with the HOA. Can you confirm your position?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted around like she was trying to find an escape route, but there was none. The neighbors were watching, the cops were listening, and the story she'd built for years was starting to unravel. I've always helped out with things," she stammered. "People respect my input." "That's why she trailed off as Officer Reed walked up holding a printed sheet. "Just checked with dispatch," he said. "Confirmed. No HOA title, no role. And you filed 5 unrelated complaints this year. None of them followed through." Karen looked like the wind had been knocked out of her. That's when Jenna's voice came through on Reed's radio, loud enough for all of us to hear. "Just a heads up. Officers Karen tried calling in another complaint last week under a different name, same address, same number." Everyone went quiet. Even the neighbors stopped filming, unsure what to say. Karen stood frozen, caught, exposed, and visibly unraveling. Then, just as Daniels asked her to step aside so they could document everything properly, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway across from hers. A woman in business attire stepped out and looked straight at Karen. "Karen," she called, "we need to talk. I'm from the county housing office." Karen's face went pale. Karen didn't say a word. She just stared at the woman from the county housing office like she couldn't believe what was happening. The woman walked straight past the officers and introduced herself as Ms. Patel, explaining that several residents had filed quiet complaints over the past few months about Karen impersonating HOA leadership, issuing fake warnings, and even attempting to collect dues. It all finally made sense. The clipboard she always carried, the printed letters taped to doors, the constant threats of violations. It had all been a show. Karen tried to defend herself, saying she was just trying to keep the neighborhood in order, but no one was buying it anymore. Ms. Patel calmly explained that pretending to represent any form of official authority could lead to serious consequences, especially when it involves harassment or false emergency calls. The officers took notes and asked Karen to come down to the station for a formal statement. She didn't argue. She just walked to her house, grabbed her purse, again quietly got into one of the patrol cars. The neighbors slowly started to drift back to their homes, shaking their heads and exchanging a few words of relief. One of them even came over to thank me for staying calm through all of that. Officer Daniels gave me a small nod before leaving, saying, "You handled that better than most would have." I finally put my tools away, climbed back up the ladder, and finished clearing out the last bit of gutter. Jenna texted me one final time. "Next time, I'm coming outside with popcorn." I laughed. At the end of the day, this wasn't just about cleaning gutters or a nosy neighbor. It was about standing your ground, staying respectful, and letting the truth speak louder than the noise.